Today is June 25th, 2009. I am Andrea Mott. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Dickinson, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name, including maiden name?
Rosemary Fischer, Berger.
And when and where were you born, Rosemary?
4629.
And have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
No, never have.
Do you know if there was a midwife or a doctor?
Well, about my birth, I was born in my grandma's house. In fact, it's still there in 220 South Main. And I think it was a doctor there. They called the doctor.
And can you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
I think when I was about 3, I remember sitting in a little chair and getting a doll for Christmas. And then too, as we were growing up, Christmas Eve, we would set out shoe-boxes. And of course, Santa was coming, but that was, of course, it was Mom. She would put things in these boxes for us. Get up the next morning and Santa Claus was there.
And what kind of things were in the boxes?
Well, like for the girls, it might have been bracelets, necklaces, a little bit of candy, might have been some socks.
And did you have a favorite?
I think a bracelet.
And any other early memories that you recall?
We always wore dresses. We did not wear pants when we were little. Always had to wear the dresses.
Did your mother make them, or were
Yes.
they were?
She made them, and of course we were very poor. And I had 2 aunts, my mother's sisters, who would wear the cotton stockings. And when the feet part would wear out, then Mom would take them. She'd cut the feet part off, and she'd sew them at an angle. You know, that way we could wear those stockings then.
How long would it take her to do something like that?
Oh gosh, with the sewing machine, would just take her 5-10 minutes. That's about it.
Was that how you got most of your clothing?
Oh, she sewed them. Yes, she sewed.
And where did she get patterns for those?
She would look at the Sears or Montgomery Ward catalog, and she'd take a newspaper, she would cut out the pattern, and she would sew these clothes. And then she would sew for both my grandmas too, their clothes.
And did you know your grandmas well?
Yes, very well.
Let's start with your father's mother. What was her name?
Her name was Anna Fischer.
And what do you remember the most about her?
Prayer. She'd always be sitting by a window, saying her rosary, or praying out of the prayer book. And when it got dark, that's when she went to bed. They weren't using many lights at all, but she was very prayerful. And once they moved to Dickinson from the farm, she went to daily mass every day. She walked to church, which was about 4 or 5 blocks that she would walk, winter, summer. And of course, on Sundays, we'd come into church. On the way home, we would pass Grandpa and Grandma Fisher's place, and we was always hoping that Dad would stop in there just for a little bit. And then she had this big chest where she kept her bread that she baked, and she would take out this huge loaf of bread and slice a piece off for us and put a little sugar on there. And we thought that was a treat, because at home we never got sugar on our bread. But this is one of the things that I remember her doing. And then she had 3 daughters that became nuns, and they would only come home every 5 years. And when they came home, that was a big thing, because that's when everybody got together. And they lived in this farmhouse, and they had this beautiful upstairs, but they lived in a basement. And as little kids, we would go up those stairs and just peek into the living room where the organ was, and they had these stuffed rabbits in there and plants. And the only time we ever got to go up there is when these sisters came home every 5 years. Even though my grandparents had slept up there, or when they got company, they would go up there. But other than that, that was not used. There was bedrooms in the basement, and they cooked in the basement. And
Why did they never use the stuff?
in those days, it seemed like you kept certain rooms, especially for just company. You didn't use them. And yeah, there's a lot of places like that. That's what they did.
And did you know your aunts, the ones who became nuns, did you know them well?
I just knew them after they became nuns. I did not know them before. Yeah.
And did your grandmother ever say how she felt about her daughters becoming nuns?
She's very happy about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's very happy about it.
And was that unusual at that time?
No. Mm-mm. But it was kind of unusual to have 3 from one family to become nuns. In fact, the oldest one, she went first, and a year later the other 2 followed. But then the older one, she would have been able to come home for a visit, but she waited an extra year so they always could come home at the same time.
And so they did that every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And what were the celebrations or the gatherings like when they came home?
It was just a big meal and visiting. That was about it. Mm-hmm.
How long were they able to stay?
Usually 10 days. And they would come with the train at that time. Of course, later years, they were able to come home every year. That all had changed.
And where were they coming from?
They were coming from St. Benedict's, St. Joseph, Minnesota. And then Bismarck built a priory. So the two older ones, they could have a choice. They could stay in Minnesota or they could come to Bismarck. And the 2 older ones decided to come to Bismarck. And the younger one decided to stay in Minnesota because she was a seamstress and she was sewing the garments, priest vestments, and altar linen and stuff like that. And she thought if she came to Bismarck, she'd know where they would put her, what she would do. So she opted to stay in Minnesota, and the other 2 came to Bismarck.
Do you know if she regretted that decision?
I don't think she did. No, I don't think she did.
And is there anything else? What was your relationship like with your Grandma Fischer?
It was a close relationship. They would come out there, and we would, stop there all the time, and it was a close relationship.
And was there anything that you learned from her?
No, not really. I think I learned more from my own mother because I wasn't there enough to learn, like from baking and cooking and things like that.
And do you remember the kind of meals your grandmother would make?
It was just the potatoes and the meat and a lot of noodles made out of dough because that was very common, especially during the summer because you did not have freezers or refrigerators. So there was a lot of things made out of dough, the noodles and different kinds.
Now we were just talking about the food your grandmother would make, and you said noodles, and what were some of the other things?
Oh, well, she baked all her own bread and her rolls and the pies and whatever else was needed, but it was mostly meat and potatoes. They had their own meat, and raised their own gardens, did a lot of canning, jelly making, and whatever needed to be done.
And did your mother do a lot of the same things?
Oh, yes, very, very much so. Mm-hmm.
And if you could describe your grandmother, how would you describe her?
She always wore long dresses and just half aprons. It was never a whole apron, it was just a half apron. And the dresses were all alike. And I don't ever remember her as having teeth. She had this disease, I guess, in her mouth, and it pulled her teeth out, because those days you couldn't afford to have dentures. So I just ever remember my Grandma Fischer ever having teeth.
And how long did you know her before she died?
Oh gosh, many, many years. We were already married about 10 years, I think, when she died. So I've known her for many, many years because they moved from the farm to town. And then on Sundays, we would come to town and we would prepare the Sunday noon meal at home. Wintertime seemed like we made ham and potato salad and baked a cake. Of course, bread or buns. And during the summertime, it was we fried up chicken and it was potato salad and of course your buns and your cake. And we would bring that in. We would all eat that at Grandma's house. We'd bring enough for whoever was there.
Was that a weekly thing?
Mm-hmm. Every Sunday. Mm-hmm.
Is that when were you able to see your cousins and aunts and uncles
Yes.
as well?
Mm-hmm. And there too, in fact, the house is still on Highway 22 too. There, when they moved in, there was that older part of the house and a newer part of the house. There, they did the same as did on the farm. They lived in the 2 back rooms of the older part of the house. They had a bedroom back there and a kitchen back there. And there again, the newer part had a couple of bedrooms and a nice living room, and that was just used for company. Same thing as they did on the farm. But then after they moved to town, my uncle got married and they took over the place. It didn't take very long, and this nice living room that was upstairs turned into a kitchen.
Is that common at the time?
At that time, yeah, it was common that people had these nice rooms that were not used. Mm-hmm.
And was your other grandmother, was she the same way?
No.
When you came to her house? And what was she like?
Well, my mother's mother, well, before my Grandpa Fischer moved to town, we went to Grandma Armbrust's place. And there we did the same thing. We prepared all this food on Saturday and brought it in on Sundays. And there was a lot of other cousins and aunts and uncles there. Everybody brought food and everybody ate. And then I stayed with them, my Grandma Armbrust and my Aunt Rose. For 2 years, I went to school at St. Joe's, the 2nd and 3rd grade. I stayed in town with them. And there too, she went to walk to church every morning. She was also very religious and did a lot of praying, rosary in the prayer book. And I know my aunt, she worked at the Cloverdale Creamery at the time. And so I was there like during the 9 months of school year, and then in the summertime I went back home.
What kind of things would you do with your grandmother and your Aunt Rose?
Not too much. They would just, my Aunt Rose, she would listen to the radio, Jack Benny and things like that, and I guess I would just be doing my homework and be outside playing with some girlfriends, around the area, and that was about it. Went to a movie with my aunt once in a while. And then Grandma Armbrust, she would come out to our house for a week every summer. She'd pack her little suitcase and come out there, and then she'd always bring us lemon drops. So every day we would get, each one would get a lemon drop. So and then later years, my aunt found a different job. She was a housekeeper for Father Bacchus. Those days, the priests had housekeepers. And then she moved to St. Gertrude, Flasher, North Dakota. And then my grandma, she came out to live with us. And in the meantime, she became blind. And we used to have, we had the outhouses. And during the summer, we laid rocks along a path so she could feel with her feet where these rocks were to find her way back and forth. And then they talked her into having, it was cataracts, what she had, having eye surgery on one eye, which she did. In those days, they stayed in the hospital for about a week. They had sandbags, so they couldn't move their head or anything. And she came back to our place, and I always sat beside her when we ate. And I would put, when she was blind, put her food on her plate and tell her where everything was, put her cream and sugar in her coffee. And when she came home from the hospital, this was the same thing. Pretty soon one night she reached out and she picked up the creamer. She put cream into her own coffee and the sugar so we knew she could see. Then they wanted her to have the other eye done. She was in her upper 70s by then. She says, no. So I'm just thankful that I can see out of one eye. She moved back to Dickinson and lived with her widowed son, who was close to church, and went to church every day. She kind of kept house for him because he was a widow. And until she got sick and went to the nursing home and passed away.
And where was she when she passed away?
She was at a nursing home. In fact, it's just kitty corner from here, the very first nursing home in town here. And then she did pass away in the hospital, though. But she was in her 80s when she passed away.
And if you could describe your grandmother in a couple of sentences, what would you?
She was a very kind person. And she would, go out of her way to do things for you, and yeah.
And what about your grandpa's? What was your father's father?
Oh, he was a kind of a very quiet, kind person too. And during the summer, especially during thrashing time, he would come walking out to our place. He had like a walking stick. It was about, I don't know, maybe a mile and a half or something. He'd always walk out there. And he had some teeth left, but very few teeth. But he would come out there, and in town, he would just walk down to the river. They weren't very far from there, the Antelope River, I think, down here, and he would go fishing and catch enough fish to bring home for them for a meal. And Grandpa Armbrust, I don't remember too much of him. I just remember that on Sundays when we would come to town, he would come out and help carry things into the house, whether it was food, it might have been a diaper bag, or even some of the little kids. And the last I remember of him was coming into town, and they had one of these fold-out beds that were like a cupboard. You would pull the bed right out of it. And he was sitting on that bed, and he asked all of us little ones to come over to him. And that was the last I remember of my grandpa. Then he passed away. He was sick, and
What was he sick from?
I think he had cancer. In those days, they would say they died of old age, but I know many times it was cancer.
And were you close to other aunts and uncles and cousins in the area?
Well, close to my Aunt Rose and Aunt Anna Armbrust, those two. They never married, and we were quite close to him. On Sundays, my Aunt Ann, she was the housekeeper for Monsignor Arberly, and she would walk up to my grandma's house every Sunday because she knew there was other relatives there and to visit. And we would stop there all the time too. After church, we would run down the basement where she lived, below the church at that time, and spend some time with her there. So those were really the two closest aunts that we had know of.
And did you make trips to town often, or was that a special?
Usually once a week. Well, church on Sundays, and once a week they would bring the cream in, and then they would sell eggs to the Sheeler's grocery store and trade for groceries.
And did you usually go with them?
No, not during the week, unless we needed shoes or something. Then we would go with. But other than that, we would not go with. Or if it was a Catholic holiday, church holiday, then we would go with. And then for lunch, on those kind of days, you didn't go out to eat to restaurants because you couldn't afford to. So my dad would stop behind what was the Sheeler's grocery store. He'd go in and buy a couple of rings of this bologna and a pack of sweet rolls. We sit in the car, and that's where we had our lunch. We thought that was a treat.
And what did you think of town when you were younger?
We thought it was a nice place. that sometimes you wish you could live there because living on the farm was very hard, a lot of hard work.
And what was it like living on the farm? Can you describe the farmhouse where you grew up?
It was an older home, and it had, I think, 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, a very large kitchen with a coal stove in it. The living room had one of those pot-belly stoves that you used to burn coal in. And then they made a room out upstairs with mud and straw and things because we were going to board the school teacher, and he was a man. So they made out this room for him upstairs. That's where he slept. And of course, later years, then my brothers, they would sleep upstairs, and it was cold up there. And it was cold during the winter. Sometimes in the morning you get up, we had no running water. In the water pail, the drinking water pail, there would be ice frozen because it was so cold.
And what did you use for heating then?
For heating, it was that the cold stove, the kitchen cold stove, and that round belly stove, which was in the middle of the living room. They would stack that with coal, and that's where you would heat the houses. And for upstairs, there was like a register on the ceiling, and the heat from below would go up into that room. It wasn't very warm at all, but it did help.
And how in contrast, did they keep the house cool in the summers?
Just open the windows, close them when it was hot. There was no, and it was hot because you were cooking with the cold stoves. We did have a kerosene stove that we had in the porch that sometimes was really hot. We'd use that to cook on.
And were there any other outbuildings that you can describe?
Yeah, okay, then a lot of the farms, when my grandma Fischer had one too, they were called summer houses. It was like a little house next to the main house, and it would cook in those during the summer as not to heat up the stove so much in the main house. Now there was a barn where you milked, and there was the garages and the granaries, and there was a lot of buildings.
And did you ever experience isolation while on the farm?
No, not really. Mm-mm.
And how did your family gain possession of the land?
Well, my grandpa, I think he homesteaded that, and so he gave my dad a quarter of land when he got married. And then later years, he bought more and added more to it. So.
And would you consider your family grain farmers, ranchers, dairy farmers?
Grain farmers. And we did do milking too. And we milked all by hand, sometimes 20, 27 cows. There was no milking machines at that time.
And what type of animals did your family have?
Well, we had the hogs, we had the horses, the cows. Every now and then we had some just sheep for pets.
And why pets?
They were just going to give them to us. My neighbors that were raising sheep, and then we really didn't care for lamb, and I think my dad would sell them later on.
Did your family butcher any of the animals that you owned?
Oh yes, butchered the hogs, made our own sausage, cured our own hams, the bacon. And on butchering day, there was a whole neighborhood party kind of, where everybody got together and they helped with these hogs, cut up the meat, grind the meat, and make the sausage.
How long would that take?
A whole day. And of course, then they had barrels in the granaries that was with a lot of salt or whatever to cure the hams and the bacon. And I just remember on butchering days, I was kept home from school to wash off our dining room because you put water on the stove to boil in these big boilers to scald the pigs. So that water made a lot of steam, so the walls were kind of wet. And our dining room had a large high ceiling. So I would have to stand on the table and wash off the ceiling, wash off these walls on butchering day. Mm.
Well, how did you feel about that?
It was just something that you did. Mm. Then wash days too, that was a big day because you had to carry the water in to heat the water. And then when we came home from school, we had to carry the water out, empty the wash, the wash machine and the tubs that were used for rinsing, and that was and everybody had their own chore. Like one brother brought in the coal, another brother carried out to feed the pigs, and one carried out the ashes, and most of it had to, milk.
What was your chore?
It was mostly helping with the cooking and milking. And because during the summer it was, we raised a big garden, did a lot of canning.
Can you describe the garden and maybe some of the canning process?
Yeah, the garden, well, we had two gardens. One was mostly for potatoes, corn, your watermelons, muskmelons, pumpkins, squash. Then the other garden was a little closer to the house, and it was just downhill a little bit. So in order to water that garden, we had a water tank just, not probably 150 feet from the house. So Dad put in an opening into the tank, and we dug a groove leading from that tank down to the garden. And that's how we would water the rows. We would have the water run into one row, then we would shut that off, make a path into the other row, and that's how we water the garden. And we raised most everything we can, the beans, the peas, raised a lot of carrots that we put into the root cellar. And Mom would do the watermelon pickles, canned a lot of corn. Like I said, there was no freezer, so you just did all that. And of course, you bought the peaches and you canned a lot of fruit. And I know there was, during the very poor years, there was what we called the relief program. And a lot of the poor, they get commodities from that program, like rice and oranges and different things like that, flour, sugar. But we didn't qualify because a lady came out to check on us, and we had some canned goods in the basement, so we didn't qualify. Where most of the neighbors, they qualified and they got all this free stuff, and we didn't get anything. But sometimes the neighbors, they had an overabundance, so they would share some of the things with us, which helped.
And were you pretty much on the same level as far as, well off, as far as how well off you all were? Was it pretty consistent?
Well, I think maybe we just had bigger gardens, and maybe they got healed out, or things like that, and so they were, probably were a little bit better off than some of those.
And how did you can the goods that you took in from the garden?
Well, like your beans, you cleaned them and cut them and put them in quart jars. Same with the peas and the corn. And then you processed it, I think, just in boiling water bath. And that took, I think, like an hour and a half to process it in boiling water bath. But then later on we got a pressure cooker, so that it made it a lot shorter. And then we would can the chicken too. And the same with some of the pork that we butchered. Especially sausage, you put in quart jars and process that.
And how would you keep any of these canned goods? Where did you store them?
We had a root cellar down the basement. Of course, we made our own sauerkraut too, to put it in those great big crocks. And kept that in the root cellar.
And what about cold goods like milk and such? Where was that stored?
During the winter, wherever you stored it was cold enough. But during the summer months, we put the milk in jars and we set it in the tank that had cold water in it. That's where we'd keep that. That's where they would store the cream too until they were able to take it to town to sell in the water tank. There's always cold water in there.
And where would you get the water?
It was the well, the pump. It had a windmill on there, and it would pump the water into the tank.
Was the windmill there when your family moved onto that farm?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, my parents moved there right after they got married. They moved out there. Yeah, and the windmill was there.
And can you describe the roads to the farm?
They were just country roads. They were not very good. Like during the winter months, many times we did not get to church because the roads were bad, or if it rained a lot, there was so much mud, you just couldn't get there. And on those Sundays when we stayed home, that was the day we would make popcorn, roast sunflower seeds, or make ice cream, homemade ice cream.
Was that a frequent treat, or was that?
No, it was just mostly on Sundays that we couldn't get to church. And well, during the summer, once in a while, we had an ice house. We kept ice, and then we would make it ice cream once in a while.
And do you remember your neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
And who were they?
Well, one area there was the Heights, the Woolbums, and the Bergers, and the Berger family. They're all three living very close together. I think some of their chickens and pigs and everything got mixed up. And they all went to our school. They walked too. And then some other families, there were the Kohlers and the Schimbigs and the Freilichs. And they also all walked. And there was Hagels. They were all neighbors. All Kosleckis. Yeah, they all walked to school. During the winter, we just had a half a mile. But during the winter, when it was really cold, my dad would take us with the sled.
And was neighboring a common practice when you were growing up?
Yes, we would get together, especially on names, days, birthdays, and then the kids would get together. I know, like the other Berger family, they're quite talented in singing and playing guitar, and they would come over to our house, and we would all sing and play. Well, us girls, my sisters, we would play a little bit of guitar. I had a brother that played some guitar. We would play and we'd sing. Or when we milked cows, we were always singing and harmonizing.
And what kind of songs did you sing?
The Western songs. And then, we just had the radio, and we wanted to copy some of these songs. So we'd sit at the table, be 4 or 5 of us, and when the Western music would come on and these songs would come on, okay, you take line 1, you take line 2, and by the time they were done singing the song, we had the song.
Do you remember any of them?
Oh, well, You're My Sunshine is one of them, and I can't think of offhand. There were so many of them. Home on the Range was one of them. I just can't think of them now. Something about Blue Eyes. I don't remember that one. Can't think.
Well, can you tell us what the positive aspects were of growing up on a farm?
Life wasn't as fast as it is like living in town. Like you had to beat all these time schedules. There you didn't seem like you had to. Well, of course, your milking was usually the same time, morning and evening. But other than that, it was... And of course, you helped with the field work. You were out there shocking, hauling hay, and doing all that.
And in contrast, what do you think the negative aspects were?
Not being able to get out very much at all. Like getting to town. About the only time we got to see a movie was Sunday afternoons when we came in for church. And my parents would go visiting someplace, and then we would be able to go to a movie.
And what kind of movies did you see?
It was mostly westerns, is what we would see. There was 2 theaters in town at that time. I remember seeing Heidi and Shirley Temple as a little girl.
Which one did you like better?
I think Heidi.
And did you notice if there were differences in social classes when you were growing up?
Yeah, with the Bohemian nationality and the German nationality. It seemed like we have Bohemian neighbors, and in those days, when you saw a greenhouse, you knew a Bohemian family lived in that on that farm, because they just had their houses green. And of course, they cooked differently, but we would get together with them and socialize.
So your parents didn't keep you away from them because they were
No.
different ethnic?
No.
And were there places that your parents wouldn't let you go, or children they wouldn't let you socialize with?
No, we weren't allowed to go to dances until we were a certain age. When you talked about this ethnic thing, when you come back to my parents, my mother's dad did not want her to marry my dad because there was a different German. My dad was a colonist German. Mother was more of a German Russian word. So he didn't want her to marry him, and he thought that they were poor. And then my mother, she was like 24 years old at the time. She told my grandpa, if Joe never comes back to see me, it's all going to be your fault. Then somehow through Monsignor Arbery, the word got out that it's okay. So they got back together and they got married. And I say then Grandpa Armist, he just loved the kids. He was waiting for us to come on Sundays, and it was just a different ballgame, you know.
It was different being a grandpa
Yes.
than... Did you ever see those descriptions that your mother had of your grandfather? Did you ever see that?
No. Because like I say, he died when I was very young. And I don't remember him ever coming out to our farm.
Now you touched a little bit on the dating thing, so I want to talk about that. Well, in youth activities, what kind of pastime activities did you have when you were a teenager?
Well, neighbor would get together, we'd play cards, sing, and I think probably played Chinese marbles and let's see, a few other some other board games. And that was about it.
And were you involved in any sports or clubs?
No.
Well, what about radio programs? Did you listen to the radio?
Yes, Ma Perkins. I think Guiding Light. Now I guess Guiding Light's going to be gone off the air after many, many years. But yeah, those were two programs we'd listen to on the radio.
And you mentioned you went to the movies a lot. When you were older, what kind of movies did you see?
I guess it was mostly westerns that we would go to.
And how old were you when you started dating?
Oh gosh, I was like 16. When we started going to dances. And then it was mostly wedding dances that we were allowed to go to.
And can you describe a typical date?
On the farm?
Just a typical date.
Oh, a typical date?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Of course, George was the only one that I ever dated. Come and pick me up, we'd go to the movies or go to a dance. And
Well, what was the typical date like with George?
that was it. Just, yeah. That was it.
Did he pick you up in a car, or how would?
Yeah, in the car. Or before that, he would come up with the horse or a bicycle, and we would play cards. And that was about the visit.
And where did you first meet George?
I knew his sisters before I knew him, because his sisters went to Sunday school with me, and then I think George and his brother Val would come up to our house with his parents one time, and that's where I got to know him a little bit. And then he started coming up to see my brothers, and that's more or less how we got involved. You know.
Oh, and can you describe how the customs of courtship are different? Well, or different then than they are today. How are they different?
Well, in those days, you didn't go out that much, and you didn't live together, or any of that. And like I say, you just got together maybe once a week, or even less sometimes.
And when you were a young adult, did you ever attend parties other than wedding dances? And stuff?
Birthday parties in the neighborhood.
And what would you do at those?
We just play cards, sing. There's usually music.
And was there a community meeting place for dancing and
No.
and such?
No.
And what day were the dances typically held on?
They were usually held on, the wedding dances were usually during the week, like on a Tuesday night. Those days you didn't have weddings on Fridays and Saturdays. It was during the week where you had the wedding dances.
Well, speaking of weddings, was there any arranging or arrangements made for you and George by
No.
your parents?
No.
And what were your parents' attitudes towards him?
They were okay.
And when and where did you get married?
We got married at St. Joseph's Church just up the hill here in November 4th, 1948. And those were all-day weddings.
Can you describe the wedding?
Okay, you got married at 10 o'clock in the morning at church. And then you had a noon meal. You hired cooks, women that would do this. You furnished the chicken, the potatoes, you baked your pies and your cakes, and you brought that in, and that was at the community building, which is now tore down. And these women, they would prepare that, and you would send out, it was just postcards for this wedding. And then after the noon meal, then you went to the studio to have your wedding pictures taken. And then there was the evening meal again too, where they would do the cooking again. And then there would be a dance after that. It was you danced until midnight, and then you went and changed clothes. You got out of your wedding gown, and you put on a different dress. And you went back and you danced for probably another hour and a half or so.
And why did they change clothes?
It was just a habit. The wedding just till midnight. Then you got out of the wedding gown and put on different. That was the what you did. That's what they all did. I don't know why, but.
And were there any money dances for the bride and groom?
Any money dances? Mm-hmm. Well, I think they paid to get into the dance as to help pay for the band, because you had to pay for the band, and they paid in to get into the.
Can you describe the foods that were served at your wedding?
Yes, like at noon we had the chicken noodle soup, chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and I'm sure with some vegetable, and then and pies. And the evening meal consisted of meatballs, potato salad, and I forget pickles, your buns, and was cake. Was for the evening meal.
And what kind of cake?
It was just cake that people brought that you baked. Of course, then we had our wedding cake. In fact, I still have the top to our wedding cake, and that people brought, furnished. So.
And was there anything unusual about your courtship or wedding?
No, I don't think it was.
And did you have a honeymoon?
No. Well, 2 years after we were married, then we did go to California to visit relatives.
Was that the farthest you had ever been away from home?
At that time. Mm-hmm. Well, I at the age of 16, I went to Bismarck to work in a hospital there.
And what did you think of that?
It was just something that seemed like once you turned 16, you went to find a job. then I would send most of my money home. I just kept enough to pay rent and food.
And how much did you earn in, say, a typical week?
Oh gosh, probably $30. In fact, I still have my stubs. My stubs from I have all my stubs from where I worked there.
And after you, what made you go to Bismarck to work in the hospital?
Oh, well, my parents thought that, there was nothing for me to do at home. We couldn't go to high school because there was no buses running. There was no place for us to stay in town to go to school. So everybody just went and found work. And at that time, I had two aunts down there that were nuns. Plus, I had another aunt down there that worked at the hospital. So this was just a place to go and work.
Now, we were just talking about the work you did in the hospital. Did you have any other jobs?
Yes, I worked after I left the hospital and came home. I came home to help with the harvest. And then that fall, I started working at F.W. Woolworth Company. And then I was there, I suppose, about 4 years.
And
I worked there.
Did you like it?
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like?
It was, you were in a counter, you were higher up, like almost a pharmacist are. You were higher up, and you had the cash registers, and you counted out the money. It was not like it is nowadays, that it adds everything up for you, And then I was doing that, and then I would help out. It was called a floor walker. You would walk the floor, and then if somebody needed change for their till, they would yell out, like counter 2 needed 10s or 20s, or they would just yell this out. You would hear it. You would go to the big drawer and bring out this cash for them. It's called a floor walker.
And how long did you have that position?
I did it off and on throughout those 4 years. Not full time. I did it off and on.
Now, I'm going to jump backwards a little bit so we can talk about your childhood some more. What kind of activities did you partake in for fun when you were younger?
We played with dolls, played house. We'd go upstairs, part of it wasn't made out, and we'd set up different things for, like, different separate rooms, things like that. And outside it was kick the can, blind man's buff, we played some softball, just for, entertainment.
And where did you learn to play some of these games?
I think just from the older kids in school.
And did the weather ever influence what you would choose to do?
Oh yes. If it rained real heavy, or in the wintertime we did have a creek close by, and we'd go ice skating. We do that.
And what did your ice skates look like?
They were just with one blade with it slipped in the shoe, and yeah.
Did you ever fall?
Oh yes, all the time. All the time.
And what type of toys did you play with?
It was mostly dolls. The boys had a few trucks and things like that, but us, it was just mostly dolls and some little dishes that we would get as gifts.
Store-bought?
Mm-hmm, store-bought. Mm-hmm.
And who did you usually play with?
I think it was just my sisters. There was 4 of us.
And what were their names?
There was Tilly, Florence, and Ann.
And did your mother or father ever play with you?
No. Mm-mm. I think my dad did play cards with us every now and then. Rummy.
Go ahead.
Rummy. Played rummy with us.
And where was your favorite place to play?
I think upstairs in the house.
And why the upstairs?
It was kind of wide open. We could do whatever we wanted there.
And did you ever play with farm animals?
No. Mm-mm.
Did you have any pets?
We had the dogs and the cats, but they were just around all the time.
So they weren't really
No.
any animals that you played with?
No.
Well, do you have any favorite rhymes or sayings from that time?
I don't remember any offhand.
What about superstitions or scary stories?
When the clouds would come up and there was a hailstorm in sight, and then they would bless the house with holy water. I don't know why. And I remember my dad saying, do not go outside and touch the barbed wire fence or tin wash tubs, like it's due to the lightning striking or something. And I know he would always walk from window to window, door to door, and watch the weather. And I think it was because to make sure that if lightning did strike a barn or a granary, he would notice it. Then later on, they did put up what they call lightning rods, so it did strike. I guess it would take it down.
And did you have any favorite songs from when you were a child?
I don't remember offhand. I don't remember him.
And did anyone in your family play musical instruments?
Just guitar.
And you said you learned how? And who taught you?
I took a few lessons in Bismarck, and then I kind of self-taught. Then my sister played, and my brother played, and I had one brother play the accordion.
Did you ever learn how to play the accordion?
No, never did that.
Well, is there anything else you would like to share about your childhood pastimes?
I don't remember offhand anything else.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about your grade school experience. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I think I always want to be a nurse.
And why did you want to be a nurse?
I think just caring for people, and I just kind of like that aspect of it.
And where did you go to school?
Well, my first grade I went to country school, and then the second and third grade I went to St. Joseph's over here and stayed at my grandma's house. And then from 4th through 8th I went back to the same country school.
Was that a difficult transition for you?
No.
And how did you get to school?
We walked. Unless it was really cold and a lot of snow, then my dad would take us with his sled. He'd come pick us up with the car if he could. If there wasn't too much snow, he'd come pick us with the car. If it was really, really cold, others we walked. It's like a half a mile.
And what were your schools like?
One room schoolhouse. The teacher had all the grades.
And it was just the one teacher.
We brought our own lunch, carried our own water.
What did you bring for lunch?
Usually Mom prepared the lunch. She made sandwiches, and cookies or cake or fruit, whatever there was.
And what did you carry it to school in?
We had Carol buckets or some kind of a bucket that was the lunchbox. And we also boarded the teacher most of the time. So for some reason, the teacher always got a little bit better lunch than the kids did.
Do you think that was fair?
No.
So what did the teacher eat in comparison?
Well, it was maybe just a better sandwich. Maybe we had peanut butter and jelly, or she had probably some meat in hers or whatever.
And what was the composition of the school population as far as males to female?
I think it was pretty well half and half.
And did your teacher treat children from different social backgrounds or ethnicities differently?
No.
What about children treating one another differently because of those same differences?
No.
And what was the attendance like at that school?
Well, there were probably 14, 15 kids, and the attendance was good, but in the fall, sometimes the older kids are kept home to help finish harvesting. Or in the spring, they were probably kept home to put in the crop.
Did you ever have to stay
No.
home?
No.
And what is your favorite memory about going to school?
I think once when they went into a hot lunch program, we didn't have to bring our own lunches. We got these commodities, and then every week, a certain group, it was up to us to prepare the meal. It might have been bean soup or potato soup or just the beans and fruit, whatever there was.
And what subjects were you taught?
Everything: geography, history, math, spelling, reading, arithmetic.
And what was your favorite one?
I think the reading part of it was.
Now, what was your favorite subject?
Reading.
What was your favorite thing to read?
I think it was. I liked history, reading history books. And then we had a very small library that we could take books out of and read those.
Did you have homework to take home?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
What was the subject you usually had homework in?
It was mostly arithmetic and English, I think, that we had to do at home. Study spelling words.
And did your parents or siblings ever help you with your homework?
Not the parents, because their education was so limited. But the older siblings would help. Of course, we had the school teacher boarding there, so that helped too.
And what was the school teacher's name?
The very first one I remember was Betty Carey. And she was the first school teacher I think we boarded. And my older brother had just started school, and he could not speak English because they always spoke German at home. But she could speak and understand German, so that helped him in school. Of course, that's how he learned the English language then through the first grade. And then the rest of us picked it up, and my parents too. But my parents mostly spoke German.
In home? And were you a good student?
I thought I was.
Did you ever get into trouble?
I can't say. I think at St. Joe's one time I got into trouble because my desk was so messy. Oh yeah, on the farm I got into trouble too because I tattled on the 8th graders. They had brought these rubber guns to school and they were shooting, and I tattled on who had them. The teacher took them away and threw them in the furnace, So then on the way home, this guy I walked home with, he lived another half a mile further south. He was 8th grade. He chewed me out on the way home for tattling. That's.
And what neighbor kid was that?
Pardon me? What?
What neighbor kid was that?
I hate George Hagel.
And what social activities were done during recess or the noon hour?
Mostly it was playing hide and seek. In winter time, we had a big hill by the school, sled riding. And then during the spring or early fall, it was softball.
And did the school participate in celebrating the holidays in any way?
No, not.
So there were no Christmas programs or anything?
Yes, there were Christmas programs. Yes, there were Christmas programs. In fact, usually one of the farmers, they went to town to a lumber yard and they brought out planks to build a stage. So we'd be up a little bit higher. Then we had the Christmas programs, and then there was Santa Claus would show up.
And what was that like? Can you describe how Santa Claus would show up?
He would come in through the door, noisy, ringing chains, scared us half to death. But, and of course the parents would all come to the program, sit in the seats.
And what was your favorite holiday?
I think probably Christmas. The 4th of July was a pretty big holiday too, because that's the day we would get to go to, it was Sheffield, North Dakota, which is just south. And there they would have races, all these different games where everybody would participate, the old and the young, the egg races, and we'd take our own lunch along. We'd sit with different families and have our lunch. So that was kind of a big day, the 4th of July.
And would they make anything specific for the 4th of July luncheon?
No, each family brought their own. It was mostly sandwiches and cookies, but I think we would bring ice cream. Somehow we had it in ice and shared, and then we had ice cream cones. That was the big thing.
You had ice cream cones?
Ice cream cones,
And where would you make those?
No, we bought the cones, and then the ice cream was bought ice cream too, and it was in a certain kind of wrap. It last long enough so us to get there and have our lunch right away. Otherwise, it would melt.
And did your family do anything special on Christmas Eve?
No, not the first years, but later years we opened gifts on Christmas Eve. Before that, Christmas Eve was just like any other day, only like I'd mentioned that Mom, we'd set our shoe boxes, and of course Santa Claus would come and put in goodies and some gifts into the shoe boxes.
And do you remember any of the gifts that were in the shoe
It
boxes?
used to be bracelets, necklaces, socks. Like the boys got little trucks and things like that. Or some other smaller toys, maybe smaller dolls that would fit in there.
What's your favorite gift that you remember receiving?
I think a bracelet, extension bracelet.
And did your family celebrate Easter?
Not any differently than, well, the big thing was we'd make the Easter bread. That was the big thing. Easter bread and angel food cake and ham. That was the Easter Sunday thing. Of course, we'd come to church and they all meet at Grandma's house.
And were there any games that you would play on or around Easter?
No.
And what about birthdays?
Birthdays, they were not celebrated until later years when us girls got old enough to bake a cake. Otherwise, the birthdays really weren't celebrated.
What about names days?
Names days, my dad, yes, his name was Joseph, which was March 19th. That was a big day.
And what would you do for that day?
And we'd cook and bake all day, get ready for this. And then the whole neighborhood would come and they would play cards. The women would be in one room playing cards and the men would be in another room playing cards. And then they served a big midnight lunch that we prepared.
Was it just you girls that prepared it?
My mother, yeah.
And were there any other holidays that your family participated in, like Halloween or New Year's?
No. New Year's, once we got older, we went to New Year's Eve dance. That was it. But Halloween, no, there wasn't anything special about that.
Now, earlier we talked a little bit about religion in your family. How important was religion during your childhood?
I guess it was very important. We were raised that way. And we'd always pray our meal prayers together, stand up in line and say the meal prayer before we sat down to eat.
And you said your family attended church every other week? Or
every Sunday. But as we got older, we had to take turns as kids because the car was big enough to take us all. So one Sunday, these four went, next Sunday the other four went. And you had to stay home,
And what church did your family attend?
St. Joseph's Catholic Church, the one right up on the hill here.
And were there any seating arrangements at that time?
In church? Mm-hmm. My parents, they had a pew, but they rented a pew. I guess that was the income for the church. And they had a little plaque in there with their name inserted in it. And this is where we would sit with the parents. It was so far back, as a little kid, you couldn't see what was going on up front. And they had like hat racks in the pews to put a hat holder, you know. They would have those. And then later years, the girls sat on one side of church. They were on the left-hand side, and the boys, the young adults, sat on the right-hand side. They didn't mix together. The couples sat together, but the singles, they're separated.
How long did that continue?
Oh gosh, till about 1950, I think, something like that, 52, where it started to change.
And what were some of the religious activities you participated in?
But the only thing is was Sunday school. When you didn't go to the Catholic school, then you went to Sunday school every Sunday. I think it was from 10 to 11. The nuns, they would teach different grades. And we had assignments that we had to learn these assignments. A lot of times on the way to town, you were studying your catechism lesson and trying to, get that all squared away.
And were you baptized in this church?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the baptizing process?
Well, those days it was just sponsors to the child, and usually the father, they went to have this child baptized. It was usually Sunday afternoons. You had a big meal. You invited the sponsors that were for this child for the meal, and the mother seemed like you got the baby ready, and then the sponsors that took the baby to church, they had it baptized. Where nowadays, the whole family is involved. In those days, not. You didn't even go to church for the baptism. But the priests, when they baptized.
And what about your first communion? What was that like?
Well, there too, you went to school for that whole year, and you got the instructions to make your first Holy Communion, and then those days you could not eat or drink after midnight. And church wasn't until 10 o'clock in the morning, so it was pretty tough, And you were dressed up in this white dress and veil, and you received your first Holy Communion during Mass.
And what about confirmation?
Confirmation was the same thing. Mm-hmm.
And how old is that usually?
I was confirmed communion at the age of 7, and confirmation at the age of 8.
And did your family have a celebration after your confirmation?
No, we just had a meal at my grandma's house, which wasn't anything unusual. It's kind of the same as every Sunday.
And did your parents, were you able to question religious teachings?
No, we never did.
And what did your parents restrict you from doing because of religion?
Well, it was like eating meat on Friday for one thing. And like during the Lenten season, you didn't go to movies. And there you restricted no meat on Wednesdays either. But I think there wasn't a lot of restrictions for us as growing up.
Mm-hmm. And was Sunday dinner or supper different than any other day of the week?
Yeah, it was a little more elaborate. Mm-hmm.
And can you explain what it was?
Well, your Sunday dinners were like, the chicken and the potatoes or potato salad and whatever you brought from home. And the suppers on Sunday at home on the farm, they weren't very big. I mean, we seemed like we had our main meal at noon in town on Sundays, and otherwise it was like you open a jar of sausage or something like that, and there was no big thing for a supper.
And what was the typical meal for a church celebration?
The chicken noodle soup, the chicken, potatoes, gravy, buns, a vegetable, a salad.
And was the German language used in prayers and services?
Mm-hmm. In fact, up to about 1954, 56, I would go to church at 7 o'clock in the morning because we had the little kids. And then Monsignor Arbley was our priest. He would have one homily in German, then he would have a homily in English, just for the 7 o'clock Mass. And then George would go to the 9 o'clock Mass, which is called the Children's Mass. And then it was all English. There was nothing, but the 7 o'clock Mass, it was German.
And how did your family respond and react towards death?
It was just part of a natural thing. In fact, I remember my Uncle John passing away. In those days, they kind of kept the bodies at the house. And they had vigil day and night.
Is that what a typical funeral was like then?
Mm-hmm.
And how did your family view other faiths?
They didn't want you to, like with the Lutherans or the Protestants, they didn't want you to spend time with them, or didn't want you to marry into a Protestant or Lutheran family.
So it was forbidden to date
Mm-hmm.
or marry them. What would happen if one from one religion was married?
They were kind of an outcast. Yeah, it happened to a family. That this gal, she got married to a Lutheran and her dad disowned her.
Was that uncommon? Or was that...
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't uncommon because well, not too many did it, but if they did do it, why they were kind of cast out of the family.
Well, is there anything else you would care to add about religion or your family religion?
It was a strict Catholic religion. Like I said, my grandparents were very religious. And then growing up, was during the Lenten season, you always prayed the Rosary as a family. And made sure we said our night prayers, as a kind of a group.
Was it something you did before meals as well?
Oh yes, we always said the prayers together before meals. Mm-hmm. And first it was in German, then later on it was, in English.
I'd like to talk just a second about health care. What kind of health care was available when you were a child?
None. We very seldom got taken to a doctor. I think my brother, he had a tonsils taken out. But if you got sick with a cold or cough, they rubbed you down with Vicks Vapor Up and heated up some towels or something and put it on your chest. And made their own cough syrup out of onions. They boiled up onions, they added honey. And they would give you that as a cough syrup. No, you didn't get to a doctor. They somehow managed to do it on their own.
And
Treat their own cases, whatever it was.
so besides your brother getting his tonsils taken out, was there anyone else who was seriously injured or ill?
No. Mm-mm.
Do you remember about hearing about births at home?
Oh yes. Well, we were all born at home. Well, I was born in my grandma's house. My brother was born in my grandma's house. The rest were all born at home except for my youngest brother. He was born in the hospital. He came about 7 years later than my sister, and he was the only one born in the hospital. Otherwise, we were all born at home with midwives.
And where was the closest doctor's office then?
Dickinson.
And how far of a drive were?
It was 50 miles with the speed you could drive at that time. It was about 45 minutes to an hour.
And during your childhood, did you ever visit a dentist or an eye doctor?
A dentist. Never eye doctor, but a dentist.
And
And speaking of illness, I didn't want to get this in there now, or during the 1918 flu, it was bad, and my dad was still living at home, and there was some in his family that had that flu, and I think it was Sister Herlinda's was very ill. At that time, she wasn't a nun anymore. She wasn't a nun yet. In fact, my grandpa sent my dad to town, to Dickinson, to get the priest to anoint, because the Catholics, they would be anointed before they died, to anoint her, because they figured she was not going to make it. So my dad brought out the priest, and he anointed this girl. This priest went back to Dickinson, and he died of the flu. He must have had it before he came. He's buried out here at St. Joe Cemetery. Yeah, he died. He anointed her, and she lived, but he passed away.
did he pass away soon after?
Yeah, the next day. Yes.
So he was in the middle of having the flu when he came to...
To Grandma's house to anoint.
Did you find that odd?
Uh-huh. Yes, we found that. Uh-huh. I learned that the later years. There's in the history books, too, that he passed away from the flu. Yeah, there was a lot of people that lost families, members during that epidemic. And my dad said he got a little bit of it, like a little wave of it, but it wasn't, didn't put him down, you know.
Well, is there anything else about healthcare or funerals that you would like to add?
Funerals, as youngsters, we didn't get to go to. Seemed like the parents mostly went.
So it was an adults only?
Yeah, it was kind of adults only at that time until we got, older. Because I don't remember going to my Uncle John. He was only 35 when he passed away. I remember going to his funeral. I remember seeing him at the house, laying in the coffin, but not to a funeral.
We haven't talked too much about historical events, so I'd like to touch on that for just a minute. Can you describe the Dirty 30s? What it was like for your family?
Well, I guess they were very, very poor, and there was no crops. And it's a good thing we did have canned goods because we were able to water the one garden, so we would get the vegetables to can. And Mom would sew our clothes. In fact, when she got older clothes from where my aunts didn't want anymore, she was able to put those together and make us outfits from those.
And how did the Depression affect your family?
Well, there was no money. And you just brought in the cream and the eggs and trade for the groceries that we had. And of course, then during World War II, we got coupons for gas, rationing, for sugar, coffee. You were only allowed so much with a coupon. And of course, if you were a larger family, you had more coupons that you would get.
And do you remember, I'm going to jump back into the 30s and such, did you yourself experience any of the dust storms or the grasshoppers and jackrabbits?
Oh, yes. The dust storms. I remember one Sunday being in town at my grandma Armour's house, and pretty soon the man, they looked outside, and the sky darkened, the sun, because all grasshoppers were moving in. It even shut out the sun. Then my dad says, we need to go home. And we went home, and they had some kind of a poison or something that they went over the fields, and they put this poison out for the grasshoppers.
Did it work?
No, it worked some, but they still lost a lot.
And what about jackrabbits?
Jackrabbits, well, that's, I know my older brothers hunted a lot of those, but I don't remember too much about the jackrabbits.
And do you remember the WPA or the CCC?
Yes. The WPA, my dad worked on that for a while. They built a road east of our place someplace, a county road, and put in a bridge or culverts, and he did work on that for a while. He was grateful for the work. It brought in a little bit of income. That I don't remember too much about because none of my aunts or uncles worked there. Well, I think my Uncle Frank in California, he's 100 years old, and he's the only one living yet from my dad's side of the family. I think he was working there, but as far as my own, I don't remember them working there.
Was there anything else about the Dirty 30s that you would like to add?
Just that there was a lot of dust, chisels flying around.
And can you tell us how World War II, the outbreak of World War II, changed your life?
It was on a Sunday morning. It was my turn to stay home that Sunday. Had the radio on. I remember President Roosevelt coming on the air, and he said, "We are at war." And of course, then a lot of them were drafted. My two older brothers were in, but they were in kind of at the end of World War II. But I had aunts and uncles and a lot of other relatives that went.
Did they come back?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they all came back.
And how did rationing affect your family?
We just used a lot less. Like coffee, I think there was some kind of a grain that they had, I forget what they call it. They mixed it in with the coffee to make it last, to go further.
Did it taste different?
Yeah, it tastes, well, we didn't drink coffee, but I'm sure it tasted different. And of course, you didn't do as much baking. You used the flour more for the noodles and stuff because that's where you needed it, especially during the summer months when you didn't have freezers.
And where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I think that was a Sunday I was at home. Wasn't that when World War broke out, December 7th, 1941? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was at home. Heard it on the radio.
Well, is there anything else about World War II that you would like to share?
I just remember my grandma coming out to the farm, Grandma Fischer, and she was crying because my Uncle Milker, her son, was drafted. So she was very concerned about that and going into the service. But he came home okay too.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your home life when you were younger. Where did you go to the bathroom?
The outhouse.
The outhouse. And how far away from the home was that?
I would say about 50, 60 feet in the backyard under a tree.
And what was used for toilet paper?
Catalogs. During the summer, it was peach wrappers. That was a treat.
And what did the inside of the outhouse look like?
It was just a plain wooden building. It, with the bench and the two holes and spider webs in there during the summer. And
Did you ever get attacked?
no, you just went out there with the broom every now and then and cleaned it out, or went out with water and washed it down and stuff. Oh.
And can you tell us about the bathing?
The bathing was on Saturday nights. We had a folding tub. It's about the size of a regular tub. It was made of rubber. And then it was set up in the porch, water heated. And the little ones got their bath first. And that's the way we moved up. We just kept, everybody used the same water. We just kept adding more water. And it seems like the parents were the last ones to take their bath. Next morning, all this water had to be carried out of this tub, dumped in the yard somewhere, and the tub was rinsed out and folded back up again. Most people just had the round, galvanized tub. No, we had this big, long tub. It was kind of a nice.
And what was it? What was the order of who took the bath first?
The youngest ones first. That was the order. And then I think us girls, and then the boys, and the parents were the last ones at night. And then we had this porch. It was a closed porch where we set up the bathtub, and then there was a kitchen window. You could see into the kitchen. But during the bath time, a curtain got pulled over this kitchen window.
And were the other doors in the house shut?
Yeah.
The kitchen?
Well, the one leading to the kitchen or from the porch, they could get in there a different way. So, but that was once a week.
And how often were you supposed to brush your teeth?
Well, we were supposed to brush them every day. I don't think we did. For years, I don't think we even had any toothbrushes,
And what about toothpaste?
Toothpaste. Well, I think you used to use soda for toothpaste.
A little bit about technology advancements during that time. When did your family get electricity?
They got electricity in, I would say, 1946, I think.
And how did that change life on the farm?
Oh, that really changed it. You had lights, and then they bought electric stove, got rid of the cold stove, they got a refrigerator. And I remember my dad, he had the habit of coming into the house and taking his hat or cap off and just laying it someplace. And he forgot this one time because these burners stayed hot on electric stove. He come in and laid his cap right on and his cap was burning. But no, it was quite a change. And then too, it was another change is we finally got a pump for water by the sink. It was just a little pump with a handle on that you pump water. That way we didn't have to haul our water in for heating for washing clothes and stuff. Of course, then we got an electric wash machine too. Where the old washer, you had the handle where you had to keep working it and paddling it one foot and this way, and it turned the agitator that way. So it made a lot of difference.
What about with laundry?
Laundry too. Mm-hmm.
And when did your family get its first telephone?
I would say 1947.
And how did that change?
That changed it too. You have party lines, and each party had a different ring. I forgot what ours was. If it was two longs and one short, that's how you knew whether the call was for you or it was somebody else. And of course, everybody would listen in to all the conversations that were going on, regardless. But that was a big change too.
Everybody knew everybody
Mm-hmm.
else's business.
Yes.
Now, can you tell us what your most stressful childhood experience was?
I guess I don't remember anything being all that stressful as growing up when I was small.
What about your happiest memory?
It was just the school days.
And your most adventurous childhood moment?
I think the school picnics, the country school picnics. And there's one time we even went to Medora, packed our lunch, and then the teacher, she had her own car. And I think another family member, a couple of them, went along and they drove around Medora. The aunt. I think that was the first time I got out of Dickinson.
Oh, yeah? How old were you then?
Then I was probably 11, 12. And then a lot of our other picnics were right at the school, or two country schools would get together and have a picnic. And there would be games played, or softball.
And that was the adventure?
The adventure, And then too, for the Medora picnic, we took hot dogs along. We had hot dogs. That was a big adventure, because we never got hot dogs at home.
And, well, is there anything else about your childhood memories that you would like to add?
One thing I remember is when my grandpa Armpus died, I probably was 4, 5 years old. He died in October, and we had so much snow, and there were no telephones. Then I remember some aunts or uncles drove as far as they could toward our yard, but they couldn't get into there, so much snow. And they yelled up to the farmhouse that Grandpa Armpus died. That sticks in my my mind, to notify us of his death. And then my uncle Marcus, he had a restaurant in town, and he would save all the dried bread or leftover toast, rolls, and he would keep them. And then when my parents or my dad would go to town once a week, he would stop there and bring this home, and we would soak it in milk for the dogs and the cats. I just remember remember that.
Well, why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Well, I think for the next generation. Because a lot of these things, they get lost. Like our kids, they give George and me each a book to write some of our history down as growing up. And we just haven't done that.
What do you hope they get from this?
Oh, just what our life was like growing up, because they had it a lot easier than what we did, because although farm life to us was a way of life, even though it was hard, that's just the way it was growing up. You didn't know any different.
Well, are there any other thoughts or observations that you would like to share?
Guess I can't think of anything offhand. I know I had a great uncle that lived not too far away, maybe half a mile. And during the winter months, he would walk over to our place every day just to visit and share some of his memories from Russia. And my dad, some of the stories. Well, he ran away from Russia. He ran away from the army. And then he came over to this country, and in later years he had sent for his wife, and I think he had a couple of children. He brought them over then.
And was this your father's brother?
My father's uncle.
Was there anything else you want to share with us that you can recall?
Well, my grandma Fischer was a twin, and she had a set of twins. Her twin brother had twins, and then it didn't show up in the family anymore until my nephew, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. He had a set of twins. There was just so many twins in that family.
Were they identical or?
Identical twins. Yeah.